for all of you regarding immigration, and yes. Do you want to start with this one? Vito? Question is, are you for or against bringing refugees into our state, and is there something that you can do to convince the governor to change the status of the state regarding housing and accepting refugees?
The part that stumps me is there's something I can do about that, which is, highly unlikely. The issue is mixed with the need for agriculture to bring in workers to do those jobs which apparently Idahoans don't want to do. That is a large issue and complex. When I first ran in 2010, I was astounded at the number of people that were concerned about immigration. And the reason I was astounded was because it's a federal issue. Shouldn't the federal government be protecting our borders? And yet, 10 years later, we're still addressing the issue, but with that twist now that we have a hostile ideology posing as a religion being brought in as refugees. And so my first question there is the state of Idaho prepared to address no-go zones? No. I think the answer is highly unlikely. Law enforcement and the rest of it is going to have some issues if Southeast Idaho finds itself in that situation. But if we continue to allow refugees of that specific ideology, there will be no-go zones in Idaho.
You're right.
The politically correct ideology, the progressive ideology, there are a number of labels on which we can place this, but to deliberately import a hostile group of people, whether it's 10%, 1%, or whatever, into the state is not going to be healthy. I mean, isn't that common sense? So personally, I was astounded to hear that the governor had ratified or whatever he had done to continue this, along with some of the other local communities. I will continue to be vocal about this. It has to be addressed. It has to be in the forefront of our minds. If we're going to suicide, I'm sure we can be much more creative about that. Yeah. That's enough. Thank you.
I can't say it any better. I did what Vito said, and I think we have enough people here who need help without bringing refugees in. Help our own first.
Yeah, and I really can't add much either. We're a nation of immigrants, but this refugee thing is completely different. And the vision is being blurred to imply that refugees are the same thing, and they are not. When I was young, I asked my mother, I said, what's our nationality? It made sense to me. She said, we're American. And she knew what I wanted. Actually, my grandfather on my mother's side was German. He emigrated from Germany. My grandfather and grandmother on my father's side were Basque. And so they came from Spain. So the fact was, but we became Americans. And that was the way it worked back then. Now what we're seeing, especially in universities, we're seeing African Americans putting there basically first, Vietnamese Americans. We're seeing, but there was a time when it was Americans first. We came to America to make America great, and that the immigrants did make America great and continue to do so. But this refugee thing, as a good representative to my left pointed out, is a very large concern. And I'm there again, at this level, we seem to be powerless to do anything about it.
It's true time. Representative Barbieri wanted to know, is it Mendive or Mendive?
Actually, when my grandfather immigrated, there are no V's in the Basque language. It was Mendive, and it was with a B, Mendive. I have relatives that go by Mendive. I have relatives that go by Mendive. And my dad and his twin brother, when they went to college, it's spelled Mendive, and that's what most people come up with, and I'm fine with that. I answered a lot of things I probably shouldn't answer to, so what the heck. Yeah, I agree with the previous people. We just need to get rid of the hyphen and just all be Americans. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't add a whole lot. I do want to reflect. I had the opportunity, and usually higher ed isn't, usually associated with conservative professors, but I had the one of the greatest professors I had when it was in college was Victor Davis Hanson, and he wrote the book The Case for Trump, and he was probably the best professor I ever had, and he writes a lot about immigration and what's happened in California, and I think we have to be careful in how we approach immigration in totality as well as refugees, and how do we form the culture of who we are, and if that becomes overwhelmed, if we are allowing so many individuals into the population, it changes our culture rather than they become part of our culture. And so it's an interesting. He has lots of writings. I would encourage you to look him up if you've never heard of him. He's a prolific writer on lots of issues, but a conservative writer and voice.
I guess it comes from being an engineer, but I always like to look at statistics. I wonder how many refugees you think are allowed into Idaho. If you have if somebody has an idea how many refugees come into Idaho each year. In 2018, it was about 400. And I'm not here to argue whether that's a good number or a bad number. But I will tell you that my great-great-grandparents came here from Germany as refugees. And so, again, we need to be careful about saying no refugees. What President Trump has done is he has made the refugee process tougher. And I think that's a very good step in the right direction, because if they're truly refugees and we know they're not here to be terrorists, then that's a good thing. Under Obama, we got almost up to 1,200 refugees a year. So just since Trump has been president, that has been cut to 400, and he's also done a good thing in allowing the states to make the decision whether they want refugees or not. And if I was governor, I would have stopped it, not because I'm opposed to refugees, but until I found out that the process that they had for allowing people into this country was keeping us safe. Because I think that's the standard we need. It's not no refugees or refugees, it's are those people coming here truly refugees, and can we stay safe if we continue to bring them into, whether it's Idaho or this country. And then I want to clarify too, I get a lot of people who confuse illegal immigration with refugees. Refugees is a legal process for people to enter this country. Illegal immigration is by its term illegal, and we just had a bill to give licenses to drive to undocumented immigrants, is what they would call them. That's not a good idea. And that seems to be, I don't know how you could, I don't understand the logic of wanting to give a legal license to drive to somebody who is here illegally. And so, but anyway, I just want to make sure that people understand there are two different issues: refugees and illegal immigrants. Thank you.
It's my understanding that Senator Gaither pulled that bill. He got so much heat that he withered.
The issue of immigration, if it weren't for legal immigration, I wouldn't be here, and maybe some of you think that might be a good idea. Both of my parents fled from Poland after World War II because they could see that all of Eastern Europe was being given over as a war prize to Joe Stalin. They knew that life under communism was going to be worse than life under Nazism, which my dad fought 6 years of his life and nearly died several times for. That's one of the reasons I have such a strong pro-liberty stand that I do. I think the issue of immigration is not so much of quantity, but quality. If we look at the Irish, the German, the Polish, the French coming over to this country, if you look at their little communities that they set up here, they typically had very strong local values, family values, cultural values that were supportive and actually actually enriching the local culture of the areas that they settled in, rather than setting up these no-go zones where they want to set up an autocratic governmental system separate from the ideals of our country. So I'm all for immigration for those types of people who want to come here, raise their hand, swear allegiance to the principles of this country.
Excuse me, I agree with the sentiments that have been expressed, and I especially like the distinction that Senator Vick brought out on the difference between illegal immigration and refugees. A couple of years ago, I was asked by constituents to check into the refugees, and I called the head of Homeland Security here in Idaho and asked him what kind of process they go through. And at the time, he told me that it was very difficult for them to understand this was under the Obama administration, understand what the federal process was for vetting refugees, especially out of war-torn countries like Syria. And he had petitioned the White House for more information and did not get it in any kind of timely manner. Because in these war-torn countries, often those documents that could back up a person's character are not available. They've been destroyed. So I think it's very important that the vetting process for anyone that comes into our state, and I'm very happy that President Trump has made it a state decision, that the process is very thorough, and that if these people are being vetted carefully and coming into our state under supervision and help from private agencies, then I think that's an okay idea if the number is limited and the community that they're coming into. So President Trump said it's a state decision. I think the governor should also say it's a local decision whether they want to have them in their community, and we won't have refugees going anywhere else in the state unless they're welcomed into that community. Just a little story. I have two sister-in-laws who are sisters with each other, and that family fled communism out from Hungary over to the United States in the 1950s. And that family ran in the middle of the night to save themselves and jumped on a freight train to get out of the country. And my sister-in-laws at that point were less than 5 years old. So that family came over. They stayed a little while back east somewhere, but they had a sponsor in Spokane, Washington that sponsored them, and they came and lived with that family, and their expenses were paid by that family until that family could get on their feet. Both the parents had been highly placed professionals in Hungary, so they were able to get jobs fairly quickly and get on their feet. But I think that part of the reaction that we have to refugees in Idaho is that there's a tremendous amount of government entitlements that are given to these people when they come in. And I would like to see that become more of a community issue, a community support that helps these individuals when they come in, so that they have ties then to closer ties to the community, whether that's a church group or just a community group that's willing to sponsor families and help them. I know that's the case in some areas of Idaho, but I do think that's the better way to do it, rather than have the government just issuing checks and not helping these people as much become part of the place that they are now living.
We have about 4 minutes, and